If the Indiana Fever's strength and conditioning and medical staff is getting paid anything more than about $1.25 an hour, it's too damn much. We've got another player that is now out for the season after we were told back for the game, now out, but not a setback. Well, I would, Stephanie White, I beg to differ, because it seems to me like out for the season is probably a pretty damn big setback. Fever fans, fire your incompetent training and medical staff. This brand of apple is rotten to the core.
What if I told you that the biggest threat to Caitlin Clark's career isn't her opponents on the court, but the very people who are supposed to protect her? What if the danger isn't coming from defenders trying to stop her shot, but from within her own organization, hidden behind closed doors, wrapped in medical jargon, and covered up with carefully crafted lies? Because right now, fans are waking up to a truth so alarming that it feels almost impossible to believe. The Indiana Fever aren't just struggling on the scoreboard, they are destroying their own players from the inside out. This isn't just about injuries. Every team has them. This is about a system, a toxic system that has turned player safety into a performance, rehab into a trap, and day-to-day into the first chapter of a much darker story. Behind the polished press conferences and empty reassurances, something is rotting. Something that has already ended careers and could be coming for their biggest star. And that's where Caitlin Clark comes in. She didn't just rise as the face of women's basketball. She walked straight into an organization consumed by chaos, and she noticed the red flags almost immediately. What followed wasn't just resistance. It wasn't just pushback. It was a rebellion. A silent war that she has been waging to protect her future and to expose the truth that the Fever would rather you never hear. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you will connect the dots the organization wants you to miss. We're going to look at the hidden pattern of injuries, the cover-ups, the contradictions, and then Clark's stunning decision to turn against her own team. By the end, you'll see exactly why the Fever's brightest hope might also be their biggest threat. To understand the rebellion, you have to understand the victims. Because Caitlin Clark didn't just wake up one day and decide to defy her franchise. She watched, she listened, and she saw exactly what was happening to the players around her. It all started with Chloe Bibby. On paper, her situation looked like nothing more than a minor setback. The Fever's official report listed her as day-to-day, the kind of label fans barely notice anymore. It sounds temporary, almost harmless. Day-to-day means she's fine, right? Just give her a little rest and she'll be back. But if you followed sports long enough, you know that label is often the first red flag. And in Indiana, it was the start of something much darker. Behind the scenes, Chloe wasn't recovering. She was being pushed, forced to travel with the team, even with a damaged knee that should have been resting, not crammed into airplane seats and subjected to hours of swelling pressure. Every ascent, every descent was like pouring fuel on an open flame. Her body was screaming for a break, but the system refused to listen. Fans started noticing. They saw her limp, they saw the discomfort, and they wondered why she was still being dragged onto flights across the country. The truth is, the organization prioritized optics over health. Having Chloe on the bench, even injured, looked better than admitting another star needed time off, and so they gambled with her career. And the result was predictable. Her day-to-day status quietly transformed into a season-ending nightmare. What was sold as a temporary inconvenience became a devastating loss. Her knee swelled so badly from constant travel that her season was over before it had even begun. Now here's where it gets even darker. When the truth could no longer be hidden, the Fever didn't come clean. Instead, they spun the story. Coach Stephanie White stood in front of cameras denying any setback, while in the same breath admitting Chloe's knee had been swelling from travel. Do you see the contradiction? It's the language of deception. Gaslighting designed to confuse the public and downplay what was happening right in front of everyone's eyes. This wasn't just negligence. This was manipulation, a deliberate effort to rewrite the narrative and convince fans that nothing unusual was happening, when in reality, a player's season had been sacrificed for the illusion of control. But here's the chilling part. Chloe Bibby wasn't alone. Her case was just the opening act in what became a wave of destruction. And Caitlin Clark was watching it all unfold. Chloe Bibby's story should have been the wake-up call. One player losing her season because of reckless decisions should have forced the Fever to change everything about the way they handle injuries. But instead of pulling back, instead of learning from the disaster, the organization doubled down.
And that's when the pattern became impossible to ignore. One by one, more names started appearing on the injury list. First, it was Sophie Cunningham, another crucial piece of the roster, gone with a season-ending knee injury. Then Sydney Colson went down with the torn ACL. Yari McDonald sidelined with a broken foot. Within weeks, the locker room began to look less like a professional team and more like a hospital ward. In the span of just 4 weeks, 5 different players saw their seasons collapse. 5 athletes, each of them trusting the same medical staff, each of them expecting to be cared for, and each of them betrayed in the exact same way. Now, fans know injuries are part of the game, but this wasn't bad luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was a crisis, a systematic failure that no other team in the league was dealing with on this scale. And when the number reached 5, it no longer felt like misfortune. It felt like malpractice. Think about it. These are athletes at the highest level. Their bodies are their livelihoods. And yet in Indiana, those bodies were treated like disposable parts in a machine. Instead of protecting them, the organization was chewing them up and spitting them out. The cover stories, the half-truths, the day-to-day labels, they weren't explanations, they were excuses. And the fans saw straight through it. Social media lit up with frustration, disbelief, even anger. People were asking the same question over and over again. How can this keep happening? And here's the thing about patterns. Once you recognize them, you can't unsee them. Every new injury, every contradictory statement from the coaches, every player mysteriously downgraded from minor issue to out for the season only made the picture clearer. The Fever weren't unlucky. The Fever were broken. And while fans were furious, there was one player whose perspective mattered more than anyone else's, Caitlin Clark. She wasn't just watching teammates fall one after another. She was realizing that if she didn't do something, she was next. The injuries alone were bad enough, but what pushed fans and players over the edge wasn't just the damage being done. It was the way the organization chose to explain it, or more accurately, the way they refused to explain it. Let's go back to Chloe Bibby's case. After weeks of watching her knee swell from constant travel, after seeing her status go from day to day to season ending, the Fever finally had to face questions from the media. And that's when head coach Stephanie White stepped up to the microphone. Her message? There was no setback. Now think about that. No setback. That's what she told reporters. But in the very same breath, she admitted Chloe's knee was swelling from travel. Isn't that the very definition of a setback? Pain increasing, condition worsening, progress reversing. Yet somehow fans were supposed to believe those two things could exist side by side. Swelling, but no setback. That's not communication. That's spin. And this is where the organization's real playbook comes into focus. It wasn't about healing athletes, it was about managing perception. The Fever weren't giving updates to keep fans informed. They were choosing words carefully to downplay reality, to minimize outrage, and to make sure no one asked too many hard questions. It's a tactic psychologists call gaslighting, convincing you that what you see with your own eyes isn't really happening. Telling you a devastating season-ending injury is nothing more than a little swelling. Pretending that players going down one after another is just business as usual. But fans aren't stupid. They could see the truth every time a player limped off the court, every time another minor issue suddenly ended a season. And the more the Fever tried to twist their words, the angrier people became. This is the point where trust shattered. Because if a coach can stand there and contradict herself in the span of a single answer, what else is being hidden? If they today can actually mean done for the year, how can anyone believe what the organization says about any injury? And it wasn't just the fans losing faith. Caitlin Clark was listening too. Every contradiction, every carefully chosen word that didn't match reality was another reminder that she couldn't rely on the people around her. Because if they could lie about Chloe Bibby, they could lie about her. By now, the writing on the wall was impossible to ignore. 5 players lost in a month, contradictions from the coaching staff, day to day magically turning into done for the season. What looked like incompetence from the outside felt like sabotage from the inside. And in the middle of this storm was Caitlin Clark, the face of women's basketball, the rookie phenom who had carried college hoops into mainstream headlines, and the one player the Fever could not afford to lose. She was watching everything unfold. She saw Chloe Bibby forced onto planes with a swollen knee. She heard her coach deny a setback while describing one. She saw teammate after teammate reduced to crutches, braces, and surgery tables. And more importantly, she connected the dots.
Clark isn't just talented, she's smart. She knew that if this system could take down veterans, it could take her down too. If she put her career in the hands of the same medical staff that had already fumbled so many others, she'd be next on the list. And for her, the risk wasn't just a bad season, it was everything. That's when she made a decision that shocked everyone inside the organization. Instead of following orders, instead of putting blind trust in the Fever's trainers, Caitlin Clark stood up and said no. She drew a line in the sand. She told team officials directly, "I'm getting my own doctors. I'm not using yours." This wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a polite request. It was an ultimatum, a declaration of independence from the very system designed to control her. In one move, she shattered decades of unwritten rules about loyalty and trust between player and franchise. And the ripple effects were immediate. By choosing to step outside the Fever's medical system, Clark wasn't just protecting her body, she was protecting her career, her legacy, and her future. She had watched enough teammates get chewed up and discarded. She wasn't about to be next. Sources close to the organization say her stance sent shockwaves through the locker room and the front office. Players whispered about it, coaches scrambled to downplay it, and executives realized, maybe for the first time, that Clark wasn't just another player they could manage. She was bigger than their system, and she was willing to defy it openly. The comparison started almost immediately. Some fans pointed to Kawhi Leonard's rebellion against the San Antonio Spurs, a conflict that began with disagreements about medical treatment and ended with an NBA dynasty falling apart. Now Caitlin Clark was walking down a similar path, only in the WNBA. This was no longer just about injuries, this was a power struggle. A young superstar refusing to let her career be dictated by incompetence, standing her ground against an entire organization. And this was only the beginning, because Clark's move wasn't just about rejecting the Fever's doctors, it was the first step in a much bigger plan, a rebellion that would unfold in phases, each one escalating the stakes, each one pushing her further away from the team's control. Caitlin Clark's declaration wasn't just words, it wasn't a dramatic outburst or a bluff meant to pressure the team. It was the start of something much bigger, a carefully calculated plan to separate herself completely from the Fever's medical machine. Phase 1. Containment. The first step was simple but radical. Clark began meeting with independent medical specialists in New York, far away from the Fever's control. These weren't the budget trainers hired by the franchise, clocking in for a paycheck. These were top-tier doctors, experts with no ties to Indiana, no pressure to spin stories for the press, and no loyalty to the team's narrative. Their only job? Protect Caitlin Clark. And here's the critical part. She refused to share their findings with the Fever's staff. Total radio silence.
Whatever her private doctors discovered about her body, whatever treatment plans they recommended, it was locked away, beyond the reach of the same people who had mishandled her teammates. For the first time, Clark had created a medical island, a sanctuary where her health wasn't being politicized or twisted into a press release. The impact was immediate. Reporters started asking Coach Stephanie White for updates on Clark's condition, and for the first time, the coach had to admit she had none. The organization's own head coach was standing at the podium, shrugging, because Clark had cut the entire medical staff out of the loop. That's how thorough her rebellion was. The most important player on the roster was operating completely outside their system, and they had no control over it. Fans noticed too. On social media, clips of White's interviews went viral. No updates. I don't have information. The coach's words weren't just vague anymore. They were proof that Clark had severed ties, proof that she wasn't playing their game. And let's be clear, this wasn't just about staying healthy. This was about power. By refusing to give the team information, Clark stripped them of their favorite weapon, the ability to spin. They couldn't mislead fans about her status if they didn't even know it themselves. They couldn't run the same gaslighting playbook they used on Chloe Bibby because Clark had taken the ball out of their hands entirely.
Think about how bold that is. A rookie, fresh into the league, telling her franchise, "You don't control me. You don't control my body. You don't even control the story." That kind of move is unheard of. Phase 1 was about survival, stopping the bleeding before it ever started. By putting her health in her own hands, Clark had insulated herself from the negligence that had already ruined so many seasons around her. But make no mistake, this was just the beginning. Because the next step in Clark's plan wouldn't just protect her, it would threaten to expose everything the Fever had been hiding. Phase 1 was about survival. Caitlin Clark built a wall around herself, creating distance between her body and the team's medical staff. But Clark isn't the type to stop at survival. She's a competitor, a fighter, and once she had protected herself, she turned to the bigger mission, justice. Because if what happened to Chloe Bibby, Sophie Cunningham, Sydney Coulson, and Yari McDonald was allowed to keep happening, then Clark's rebellion would mean nothing. The cycle would continue, more players would fall, and the Fever would keep spinning the same lies. So Clark moved into phase 2 of her plan, and this step wasn't quiet. Sources inside the league began whispering about what her independent doctors had found. The results of their evaluations weren't just different from the Fever's official assessments, they were fundamentally different. So different, in fact, that insiders began using a phrase no fan ever wants to hear: gross malpractice. Now, let's be careful here. These reports are unverified. The official records haven't been released, but the buzz has been impossible to ignore. People close to Clark say her private specialists uncovered conditions and risks that the Fever's staff either completely overlooked or deliberately downplayed. In other words, if the whispers are true, the same negligence that ended Chloe Bibby's season could have easily ended Clark's career too. And here's where it gets explosive. By stepping outside the team system, Clark didn't just protect her health, she may have stumbled onto the evidence that proves everything fans have been suspecting all along. Think about what that means. For weeks, the Fever brushed off questions. They told fans not to worry. They downplayed serious injuries as swelling or day-to-day. But now, Clark holds in her hands the independent reports that could expose those reassurances as nothing more than cover-ups. If those findings ever go public, it wouldn't just embarrass the Fever. It could end careers. Trainers, coaches, executives, the entire power structure inside the organization could come crashing down. And that's why Phase 2 isn't just about medicine. It's about leverage. Clark now holds something far more powerful than a basketball. She holds proof. proof that the franchise has been deceiving its own players and its own fans. The only question left is not if she will use it, but when. Because make no mistake, Clark didn't go to war just to survive. She went to war to win. And when Phase 2 becomes public, when those independent reports see the light of day, the silent rebellion she started will explode into a full-scale reckoning that could shake the WNBA to its core. By now, the picture is crystal clear. This was never just about one injury. It was never just about bad luck or a string of unfortunate coincidences. What's happening inside the Indiana Fever is bigger, deeper, and far more dangerous than most fans realize. 5 players in 4 weeks, season after season cut short. Press conferences filled with contradictions, half-truths, and carefully worded denial. An organization more focused on maintaining appearances than protecting the very athletes who give everything on the court. That is the culture Caitlin Clark walked into. That is the machine she saw consuming her teammates, and that is why she decided she couldn't just play along. Her rebellion, first with Containment, then with Evidence, has already rewritten the rules. In one season, she has changed the balance of power between athlete and franchise. She's shown that players don't have to blindly trust a system that doesn't value them. They can take control of their own health, their own careers, and their own futures. But this story isn't finished. Far from it. Because if the rumors are true, if her independent doctors really did uncover proof of gross malpractice, then we're standing at the edge of something much bigger. This isn't just about Caitlin Clark saving herself. This is about exposing a system that's been allowed to operate unchecked. A system that has already cost players their seasons and could cost many more if nothing changes. And the question now is simple. When Clark decides to play her final card, what happens next? Does she quietly use her leverage behind the scenes, forcing the Fever to overhaul their staff and rebuild their medical culture from the ground up? Or does she go public, letting the world see exactly how deep this scandal runs, even if it means burning bridges with the franchise that drafted her? Either way, one thing is certain. Clark isn't just the future of women's basketball on the court. She's redefining what it means to be a player off the court. She's proving that loyalty should never come at the expense of health, that silence should never protect incompetence, and that one person with the courage to say no can shake an entire organization to its core. So, as fans, all we can do now is wait. Wait for the moment when Phase 2 turns public. Wait for the truth to break through the carefully built walls of denial. And wait to see whether Caitlin Clark's rebellion will save the Fever from themselves or destroy them completely. Because one way or another, the story is over. In fact, it may only be beginning.